So we have started this new fall series called Tough Questions by Jesus. We are looking at some very difficult and profound questions that Jesus asked during his life and ministry that we find in the Gospels. Last week we started with the question on worry. Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? Of course, the answer is no, but we still worry about lots of things. In fact, if many of us are honest, it consumes many of our days. But Jesus says, live your life one day at a time, and today's trouble is enough for today. Today, we're looking at a question that Jesus raises again in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, and it pertains to judgment. He says, why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but fail to recognize the log in your own eye? He says, you hypocrite. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. For some reason, it has always been much easier for us to point out what's wrong with other people, their character flaws, their shortcomings, where they fall short and miss the mark, what others do wrong. But it's much more difficult for us to look into the mirror and do the same for ourselves. The book that I am recommending that you look at, if you want a resource to go with this series, it's called What Did Jesus Ask? It's a great devotional book, with lots of different ministers and theologians writing in it. Adam Hamilton, who is a Methodist pastor, writes about this particular passage from Matthew chapter 7. And he says, what is it in us that leads us to need to point out the flaws in others when we've got so many flaws of our own? Why do we take delight in criticizing others behind their backs? Why do we feel the need to offer unsolicited advice? What leads us to be blind to our own shortcomings? Why do we have 20/20 vision when it comes to the shortcomings of others? It doesn't take a clinical psychologist to observe that often the things that we're most critical of in others are the things that we dislike in ourselves. In John's gospel, there's another story that needs to be lifted up this morning. A woman has been caught in adultery. It was a shameful act, and the law was very clear as to what should happen to her. The scribes and the Pharisees bring this woman to Jesus, and they say, Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. The law says she should be stoned to death. What do you say? And how does Jesus respond? Brilliantly. He says, let anyone who is without sin cast the first stone. And everybody drops their stones and walks away. And then Jesus asks her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she says. To which Jesus says, well, neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again. Jesus says, do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. I think judgment has done more to harm the Christian faith than anything else. People say, I love Jesus, but why can't his followers be more like him? Gandhi said, I would have been a Christian if it weren't for all the Christians. Judgment is a problem, and it happens way too often in our culture. Hamilton points out that most of the time when we find Jesus judging in the Gospels, he's actually judging people who are judging. He's judging the religious people, the Pharisees, the scribes who are practicing judgment themselves. Hamilton says Jesus wants us to focus on the logs in our own eyes because he knew how easy it would be for Christians, pastors, and churches in the centuries ahead to focus on pointing out the sins of others. Perhaps, he says, Jesus knew that by the beginning of the third millennium, young adults would describe the reason they were opting out of church to be the judgmentalism they experience from Christians and in the churches. Judgment has done more to damage the Christian faith than perhaps anything else. And I am convinced that Christians who spend the majority of their time focusing on what's wrong with everybody else rather than working on their own character, their own shortcomings, will continue to do damage to the Christian faith. Why? Because the founder of our faith says, do not judge. It's no secret that churches like to fight over social issues. That's always been true for a very long time. You will find Christians on both sides of just about any controversial topic that we have in our culture. And we're very honest at Woodmont, and we just say we don't have a consensus on certain things because we know that we don't, and we like to be honest about that and just say that. But the problem has never been the fact that Christians disagree over a host of issues. The problem has always been the way that people act in order to defend their position. Because what happens is, regardless of which side you're on, any given hot topic of the day, the anxiety and the fear that is produced when you try to defend your position at all costs causes you to act in an unchristian way, and that's where the problem lies. Because we stop treating each other with respect, and we stop listening, and we forget about the areas where we do agree, which are vast and many. You see, Christians let the issues that divide them overcome the relationship that they have, and that's where the problem lies. And I think when Christians lose the ability to have civil and respectful dialogue with each other, then that becomes a major problem. So what are we to do with this verse? Some people say if you don't have any judgment, then you don't have standards. What are we to do with this verse? I think we should do exactly what Jesus says. And let's focus less on others and their problems and their shortcomings, and let's focus more on what we can do to address our shortcomings. And this week at this church, you're in luck because we have a great opportunity for you to get a head start on that. Open up your bulletin this morning. And I'm going to tell you about something that's happening the next 2 Wednesday nights. And I think you will want to come check it out. Ian Morgan Cron will be here this Wednesday, August 30th, and Wednesday, September the 6th, in Drewota Hall to give a presentation and overview of the Enneagram. If you've never heard of the Enneagram, you're not alone. Lots of people have it. But the Enneagram is over 1,600 years old, and it's a personality typing system that wasn't written down until the 1970s. But what it does is it gives us a much better understanding of who we are and what makes us tick. It gives us better insight into how we act when we are healthy and how we act when we are stressed. It opens our eyes so that we can begin to see ourselves the same way that others see us. And I think the Enneagram can help us identify the character flaws and the shortcomings in our lives because every single one of us has them. We just sometimes have a hard time coming to terms with them. There are 9 basic personality types of the Enneagram. And you actually have had your number, believe it or not, since about the time you were 5, according to Ian Cron and Susan Stabile. And I want to give you a brief overview this morning to hopefully pique your interest, and you'll want to dive deeper. And you can go online. There's lots of tests you can take. You can even take the test for your spouse, if that sounds fun. But this will give you an overview of the Enneagram. 9 types. Type 1 is the perfectionist. Ethical, dedicated, and reliable. They're motivated by a desire to live the right way, to improve the world, and to avoid fault and blame. From time to time, or from the time they get up until the time they go to bed, ones see the world rife with errors, and they feel a duty to correct it. Ones are after perfection, and their deadly sin is anger that really manifests itself in resentment. Ones have high expectations of themselves and of others. These are the perfectionists. Type 2, the helper. Warm, caring, and giving. They are motivated by a need to be loved and needed and to avoid acknowledging their own needs. 2s are constantly thinking about what they can do to help and serve other people. They are more comfortable giving than receiving, and they hate to see other people suffer. The deadly sin of 2s is pride. And 2s often relish in the myth of their own indispensability. Type 3, the performer. success-oriented, image-conscious, and wired for productivity. They're motivated by a need to be or to appear to be successful and to avoid failure. 3s are doers. They are focused on success and they want to be a star. 3s often compare themselves to other people. 3s have the ability to conform to just about any type of company or group. They crave achievement and success. 3s are often revered in American culture because of their drive and all that they're able to accomplish. The deadly sin of 3s is deceit. Not that they deceive others, but that they often deceive themselves into thinking that they are what they accomplish. Type 4, the romantic, creative, sensitive, and moody. They're motivated by a need to be understood, to experience their oversized feelings, and to avoid being ordinary. 4s are unconventional and they like to be different. 4s think outside the box and they often feel lonely and misunderstood. The deadly sin of 4s is envy. They can envy the normalcy, the happiness, and the sense of comfort with which others live their lives. 4s are always looking for what is missing in their lives. Type 5, the investigator, analytical, detached, and private. They're motivated by a need to gain knowledge, to conserve energy, and to avoid relying on others. 5s are cerebral and intellectual. They can also be sarcastic and cynical. The deadly sin of 5s is avarice, or a desire to clinch and protect what little they already have. 5s are very observant, reserved, and are often viewed as loners in life. Type 6, the loyalist. Committed, practical, and witty. They are worst-case scenario thinkers who are motivated by fear and the need for security. 6s are always imagining and planning for the worst, and they have a lot of anxiety and fear. They can be catastrophic thinkers. They can second-guess themselves, and they often don't trust people in positions of authority. The deadly sin of 6s is fear, and fear and anxiety can often take over their lives. However, they are very loyal and they like to be around people who are like themselves. 7s, the enthusiast, fun, spontaneous, and adventurous. They are motivated by a need to be happy, to plan stimulating experiences, and to avoid pain. 7s are full of adventure and they love to have a good time. They're happy to make last-minute plans, especially if it's something fun. 7s don't like confrontation or heavy conversation. Their deadly sin is gluttony, especially as they devour and consume positive experiences. 7s need stimulation, and they do much of what they do to distract them from the pain that's really there in their own lives. Type 8, the challenger. Commanding, intense, and confrontational. They're motivated by a need to be strong and to avoid feeling weak or vulnerable. 8s are often known as leaders, and 8s live life with high intensity. Their personalities can be overbearing. 8s have a hard time trusting people until someone proves their trustworthiness. 8s can overwork, overparty, overeat, overexercise, overspend, over anything. And for 8s, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing to the excess. The deadly sin of 8s is lust. Not lust in a sexual sense, but lust for control. And 8s must learn to deal with their anger and their intensity level. And lastly, type 9s are the peacemakers, pleasant, laid back, and accommodating. They are motivated by a need to keep the peace, to merge with others, and to avoid conflict. 9s are happy to go along with whatever other people want to do. They often choose the path of least resistance. 9s seek harmony with others and do not like conflict. And the deadly sin of 9s is sloth, which is really related to their lack of passion and motivation. 9s treasure inner peace and tranquility. And a lot of that information comes from Ian Cron's book called The Road Back to You, which is a great book. So these are the 9 basic Enneagram types. I've given them to you this morning because we have this event coming for the next 2 weeks. Which one do you think you are? Or I could say, which ones do you think you might be? Because chances are you've narrowed it down to maybe 1 or 2 or perhaps 3, and you're having a hard time of figuring that out. Once you know your personality type, that will help you identify your blind spots and your weaknesses, the logs in your own eye. It will also help you better understand the people in your life, your spouse, your children, your friends. And it will make you less likely to judge them and more likely to love and accept them. You see, everybody sees the world differently. Everybody has a different lens through which we experience our lives. And I have become convinced that in this world, where we have seemed to master binary thinking, where we judge people for being fat or skinny, liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, successful or unsuccessful, right or wrong, rich or poor, trustworthy or untrustworthy, black or white, in this world where so much of our thinking is binary, it's either this or that. The Enneagram can help us get to a place where we do understand that there is gray in the world. Everything is not this or that. And we can get a deeper appreciation for our differences and for the ways that we're not alike. And if the guy that we claim to follow as Christians, a guy named Jesus, tells us not to judge, then maybe we should listen. If he tells us to quit focusing on what's wrong with everybody else, then maybe we can work on the things in our lives that need attention. It's a distraction to focus on what's wrong with everybody else. I can sit here all day and tell you what's wrong with everybody else, but it's much more difficult to sit here and say, here's what I need to work on. Here's my shortcoming. Here's the log in my eye. If you spend your life judging and criticizing other people, then it might be a direct reflection of what's really going on inside of your own heart. Just think about that. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. In this world, we need more grace, we need more love, we need more acceptance, and we need more understanding. And my prayer is that this can be a tool for us to do that and for us to live out this scripture. Amen.